Right now, please join me in welcoming Bob McEwen, everybody.
Thank you all very much. Don't you appreciate Charlie? He's doing a marvelous work for all of us, and we're grateful for it. And he can still hear us. Scripture says that not withhold honor from whom honor is due. Honor is due what he's doing. And I want to thank all of you for being a part of it as well. He mentioned, I am a politician. And so you naturally want to ask, why would a politician be talking to pastors? And let me just tell you this. We have a lot in common. A preacher is always on. Everybody's playing volleyball, having a great time. The pizza shows up. Pastor, why don't you ask the prayer? You can never get out of that role. A congressman coming home from the airport at 1:30 in the morning, stop to get a loaf of bread, hit somebody in the aisle, boom. And also, since you're on their team, they own you. And people don't walk up to their insurance agent and say, I really don't think you should be driving a car like that. But they wouldn't hesitate to tell a preacher or a politician. And since they own you, they can, Pastor, this is the only time that my mother-in-law's in the hospital, and it's only two states away. If you leave on Tuesday, you can be home by midnight. You don't do anything on Tuesday anyway. And Congressman, this is the only time my grandson's getting his Eagle Scout award. If you leave at 8 in the morning, you could be there by noon. You'll be home before midnight. And so since they own you, and they can tell you what to do, and also there's a life partner that is alongside that might not have signed up for this program in the beginning. And if there's any perks in our job, it's, Pastor, why don't you come to the head table and pray? Congressman, why don't you come and lead in the pledge? And people will flat walk over top of a pastor's wife or a politician's wife if you let them. And yet, if there's any downsides, people will say things to a pastor's wife or they'll say things to a politician that they would never say to the principal. And so they get none of the upside, all the downside, and then finally, you can trust absolutely no one. A pastor can't go to his board and say, I've really been hitting the bottle a little too much here lately. And a politician can't go to the newspaper. He can't go to his own party. He can't go to the opposition party. So you're always on, always giving, and yet no place to be refreshed. And is it not natural that there would be burnout? Therefore, it says that we are to pray for those in authority over us. And I want to say that I appreciate what you do very much, and I, over these next 30 minutes, want to describe the fact that we have entrusted to us something that's extremely, extremely valuable. For thousands of years, people hoped to someday fly. But it was the Americans that invented the airplane, and the light bulb, and the telegraph, and the telephone, the global position. An airplane, you watch an airplane landing, invented by Americans. The landing gear, the tires, invented by Charles Goodyear, the vulcanization process of rubber. There are lights flashing, invented by Thomas Edison. An air conditioner, invented by Willis Carrier, using a global positioning system, a plane flying over the Himalayas, a ship parking in Hong Kong or Singapore at this very moment, a delivery truck in Syria is using a global positioning system conceived, invented, and maintained by Americans. No nation has ever blessed the world like this nation has. There is an insurance dealer, there is a car dealer in Buenos Aires ordering a part from Stuttgart. There is a missionary in Africa communicating to her friends around the world. There's a Bangkok doctor conversing with a doctor at Mayo Clinic using an internet that was conceived, invented, and maintained by Americans. No nation has blessed the world like this nation has blessed the world. The question would be, why? More books. This 4% of the population of the world, you've seen that picture, was the night before Christmas, 1776. They started out the beginning of the year, 45,000 people, but through death and disease and desertion, they're down to 7,500, and the only ones are hanging around because on 1 week, on January 1st, 1777, their enlistments are up. And they haven't had a victory, and the thing is about to fall apart. George Washington's prayer partner, the founder of the American Bible Society, Dr. Benjamin Rush, came down and said, we need to have a victory here, George. George says, I just wrote a letter to my cousin at Mount Vernon. I said, I fear this thing is about up. They decided that they would go down and cross the Delaware and attack the enemy that was fashioned there that had enough armor and ammunition and supplies and food and material that they could survive the winter. And so they decided they were going to do it, but here's the point of the story. On that night, as they began to march out, and you know what happened, their shoes fell apart because of the snow. They wrapped them in burlap. You could fall them because of the blood. They didn't get across in time because it was so horrible that they, instead of attacking it at dawn, they had to attack in broad daylight at noon. They had the greatest victory that there ever was. They didn't lose a single soldier, except 2 of them froze to death on the march. But only 5 were wounded. James Monroe, a little 21-year-old soldier that hit an artery, unfortunately began to spurt so they could stop it so he could become the 6th president of the United States. But in the process of doing that, before they marched off that night, George Washington said this. He said, "Post none but Americans on guard tonight." Wait. I thought if you had a birth certificate, that made you American. I mean, after all, they wear the uniform. In George Washington's eyes, being an American is not physical. As Ronald Reagan said, you and I can't become Japanese or Chinese, but anybody can become an American because American is spiritual. It's what it stands for, what they believe in. And when you do things God's way, there's a instruction, righteousness exalteth a nation. And so when you do things God's way, certain things happen. And so this little nation, 4% of the population of the world, creates over 1/3 of all the goods and services on the entire planet. And our definition are so tremendous that what we talk about poverty, it doesn't even fit in. If you take all the wealth of the Middle East, if you take those glass towers and those sheikhs with their 747s with the gold faucets, and you take all of the Middle East and the 56 countries of Africa from the border of Turkey down to Cape Town, all of those countries, the GDP combined is not as large as California and New York, just 2 states of ours. 107 million Filipinos versus 7 million Tennesseans. The GDP, the gross domestic product, the goods and services created by the state of Tennessee is greater than the entire nation of the Philippines. Over 100 more. We can do this till the cows come home. The richest spot on earth other than America is Western Europe, France, Germany, Britain. The Rector study is done by the Wall Street Journal and Heritage Foundation every 24 months for the last 37 years. If you compare a person living in poverty in America, that person is more likely to have a telephone, a television, an air conditioner, an automobile, eats more meat, has more square footage space than the average resident of the 2nd richest spot on earth, Western Europe. The question would be, why? And if we don't know the answer to that question, we're liable to elect people who want to fundamentally change America, and then there's no place else for us to go. And so let me explain how this works. And that is, it isn't just because of a philosophy, it's actually quite simple. I don't care if you're in Boston or Baghdad or Belgium or Buenos Aires, you only vote on 2 things. Politics equals integrity plus economics. Those are the only 2 things that you vote on. Those are the only 2 dials that you turn. The higher the integrity, the more I can look you in the eye, shake my hand, and you honor that word, the higher the integrity and the lower the burden of government, the greater the wealth. The lower the integrity, the more bars I have to put around the windows, the more people I have to bribe, all the rest of the things that go with the corruption that you are able to experience nearby. The lower the integrity and the higher the burden of government, the greater the poverty. And that's all politics is adjusting those 2 dials. But observe the significance of the first one, which is integrity, which is the foundation of it all. And if you don't understand the spiritual foundation, then the rest of it doesn't work. And if I come to try to sell you this building, and you want to look at the lights in the ceiling, but you want to check the foundations. If the foundations be destroyed, what will the righteous do? And so, let's go back to the foundations that made this little spot. And remember, this country was built by poor people. Nobody sold their castles, got in their clipper ships, and came here to eke out an existence in the forest. The people that came here came for freedom, and freedom creates abundance, as we're about to see. And so, politics is made up of 2 things, integrity, and what is the definition of integrity? You say integrity, it performs the task for which it was assigned. It is trustworthy, reliable. You say this platform has integrity. A bank has integrity. Integrity for a person is made up, in my opinion, of two parts. First of all, morality. And I define morality as not doing what's wrong. Very simply, it used to be on all of our school walls. Thou shalt not steal. Didn't have to have a bicycle lock. When I came out of the school, there's 200 bicycles all over the school. None of us had locks. Why? Because we were taught, thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not commit adultery. LGBT, you cannot be bisexual and have not committed adultery. So when you have all of that established in the basis, morality is not doing what's wrong. And yet, integrity is more than that. That is, daughter comes home from school one day and says, you know, everybody was picking on Sally today and calling her fatty and all, but I didn't do it. That's good. You didn't do anything wrong. But did you have the character to do what is right? And very simply, we now hit the crux of the matter. As you remember, Edmund Burke said, all that's necessary for tyranny to prosper is for good men to do nothing. You can sit on your couch all day and be moral, but that lacks integrity, because standing up when you're supposed to do what is right. And here's the critical part. What is the definition of what is right? And this is critical. Oh, by the way, while we're on the topic, you cannot do what is right if you're doing what's wrong. You cannot have character if you lack morals. It's very simple. So when Mario Cuomo says of the president a few years ago, he said, I would not trust him with my sister, but I know in times of crisis he'll do what is right for... No. If your wife can't trust you, rest assured, your country can't trust you. And so it's essential that now let's get to the bottom, and that is, what is the definition of what is right? And the answer to that question is fundamental. Whether a country is going to be rich or poor, or whether you and I are going to be successful or unsuccessful. So let's walk through what the definitions are. That is, there has to be a starting point. Somebody has to decide who it is. And our founders determined, by the way, you'll find out that our founders were great people. It wasn't until after the First World War that they began to deconstruct our founders. And this person, there's a book written by David Barton, who speaks the first thing tomorrow morning. You won't want to miss a moment of it, on Thomas Jefferson. And the book was greatly attacked by experts quoting each other. And in the book, it quotes what he said and what he believes and what he knew. For example, well, I won't get sidetracked here. But what is our definition of what is wrong? There's only two definitions. Only two. One is what I say is right. And the other is what God says is right. And our founders said, we're going to use God's example. So how do you build a government? Good old Moses, he's out there working his heart out. His father-in-law comes up to him and says, Mo, yeah. His father-in-law's name was Jethro. And Jethro says, you know, God and I were talking, and you're going to wear yourself out here, son. Yeah. He said, here's what you need to do. You need to establish a government with federal, state, and local, thousands, hundreds, and tens, and you need to keep people in charge. And we don't have 4 years to give you a course in government. And so here's the things that you have to look for, Moses. 3 things. If you do these 3 things, it'll work. Number 1 is you have to have somebody who fears God. What is the term fear? That means respect, honor. You fear the king. First of all, you have to have someone who fears God, because the only alternative to that is the person who thinks that they're God. And everyone has to come to that confrontation at some time in their lives. Either I'm God or he's God. I'm going to do it my way or his way. And so, how does it work out? Our founders got together. They realized that wisdom comes from experience, but there are some things we've never experienced before. And so the scripture says, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men liberally. And so our founders got together in the same place where 11 years earlier they had written the Declaration of Independence. The oldest man there, one of 4 that had signed the Declaration, was the most respected man on earth. His name was Benjamin Franklin, a man who was a major financier of George Whitefield, who was the spark plug of the first American awakening. And this godly man, founder of the anti-slave society, because they had gotten together, and for the first time in the history of man, slavery was ubiquitous from beginning until one day, July 4th, 1776, when they said, nope, all men are equal. And from that day forward, slavery has been anathema. And brother, do they hate those 56 people that did that. And so as they're trying to put this country together, he asked to speak, and he said this. He said, I am an old man. He said, we have gone through, and we looked for experiences through all of the ancient history of models of government that examine the different forms which now no longer exist. We wanted to find from experience. We viewed modern states all around Europe. In this situation, groping in the dark to find political truth, we have not once thought of to humbly apply to the Father of lights to illuminate our understanding. We've been crawling around here in the dark, and nobody's bothered to go turn on the lights. In the beginning, in the conflict with Great Britain, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection. Our prayers were heard, and they were graciously answered. Now, this is 11 years later, 1787. This isn't 200 years later. Look what he says. Have we now forgotten this powerful friend? Or do we imagine we no longer need him? He said, we have been instructed in the sacred writings that except the Lord. Well, he said, sir, I have lived a long time. The longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth that God governs in the affairs of men. If a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire could rise without his aid? We've been assured in the sacred writings, except the Lord built the house, they labor in vain that build it. Well, I believe this, that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. I therefore move the prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessing on our deliberation be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business. And so they recessed for 3 days of fasting and prayer. They met the following Monday for a brief little 3.5-hour prayer on their knees. And over the next 5.5 weeks, they wrote the Constitution of the United States, creating the oldest government on the planet. Every government has changed repeatedly since then. And that little place has protected the world as no place has. If a ship is attacked on the high seas, as happened over 300 times last year, to whom can they appeal? The righteousness of the United States of America to come to their aid, whether it be a yacht in the Caribbean, whether it be a trawler in the South China Sea, or whether it be a tanker by the British government in the Straits of Hormuz. The only place they can ask is the 327,000 Americans who wear the uniform of the United States Navy. It's the standard of righteousness in the world. And so they said, since it's worked that way, let's make sure that people don't forget it. Therefore, no one shall hold a position of public trust in this government unless they first swear allegiance to God on the Bible. And secondly, no meeting of this organization, the Congress of the United States, shall not be held without first calling upon God in prayer. And then finally, lest people forget, on every official document, every law that's passed, every presidential proclamation that's made, they'll remind it of the two most important times in history. One, the blood of Jesus Christ, done in this, the year of our Lord, the 2022nd, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 246th, so that people will know from whence our strength comes. And so they proceeded to do that. We have those that fear God. What's important about whether or not we choose him or me, as I said, every barroom brawl, every schoolyard scuffle boils down to two words, who says, and one of them says that I'm in charge. I got here. I climbed out of the primordial slime and said, let's write a symphony. I got here all by myself. And either you believe that man created God or you believe that God created man. And from that, you go to the philosophy section of any bookstore, of any library, pull down any book. By page 5, you can tell either you believe that man created God or you believe God created man. And everything else flows from that. And our founders were not ambivalent on the topic. They felt that God had created. Now, if you don't understand the difference between these, when people run for office, it's important that we understand on whose side they are. It works like this. If you believe that man created God, then you believe man is his own standard. If you believe that God created man, you believe that God has a standard. If you believe that man is his own standard, then you believe that man is basically good. By what standard would he not be good? Whereas you recognize if God has a standard, we fall short. If man is basically good, then anything that he does that haywire is not his fault. It's got to be. Someone comes in here and starts shooting people. Well, that's not a nice thing to do. Well, whose fault is it? Not his. He's good. Whose fault is it? The gun. Got to regulate that gun coming in here doing those nasty things. If guns kill people, how does anyone get out of a gun show alive? And yet, if a person if a person doesn't understand how this works, in New York City, a mother is pushing her baby carriage with her baby down the streets on the west side of Manhattan, the 3 most expensive zip codes in the country. She's walking down, and her baby daddy comes up behind her and shoots her in the back of the head. And the governor and the mayor of New York City says, we have a real gun problem. Because if you don't recognize God, you'll never get it right, and our founders did. And here's the most important thing that I want you to remember, and that is, without God, where do rights come from? They have to come from the group. So these people, you can listen to them for 30 seconds, and you always tell, they talk about women's rights, and they talk about Hispanic rights, and they talk about gay rights, and they talk about, there are no blonde left-handed rights. There's only rights that come from God, and they come to all of us. However, if you don't recognize it from God, then, and by the way, that's what a democracy is. A democracy is where rights come from the majority. Our daughter spent a year in Rwanda. In Rwanda, it's 80% Hutu, 20% Tutsi. 80% can vote to kill the 20% under a democracy, which they did. And over 90 days, with machetes, they killed 1 million Tutsis. Now, in America, as we'll see, you can vote 95-5 to kill Jews. You can't do it. Why? Because our rights don't come from the majority. Our rights come from God. Now, we democratically elect people. We hear these mistaken politicians all the time talk about our democracy, because we democratically elect people to the republic, ma'am, if you can keep it, to the republic for which it stands. Because we have a republic, we don't have a majority. Rights don't come from the majority, they come from God. However, these people believe that it does. And we'll see what happens in public policy. That means if you don't have God restraining what people do, no standards, then you're always going to have more government. These people believe in limited government. How do you get more government? The easiest way. Always take money out of people's pockets. The more money I take out of your pocket, the more I control you. These people always want fewer taxes. The other side wants a weak defense, and we want a strong defense. And these folks, because they are the standard, without God, I can say marriage is between 3 men and a horse. And since I'm the standard, I can make it a hate crime for you to laugh at my definition of marriage. And that's called tyranny. And it's not coming. It's here. If you call a man that claims that he's a girl, and you say, yes, sir, in the city of New York, you can be fined $250 per occurrence, and it's just the beginning. There is no bottom to which man cannot sink without God. And therefore, our founders believe, and so once you understand this part, and if you show me where a person stands on passing out condoms in the classroom, I will tell you within a 90% certainty where they stand on cutting the capital gains tax. Now, my father said, now, Bob, that's a little, no. If you're hiring a person on your staff, and you can only ask one question. Do you believe in the actual physical virgin birth of Jesus Christ? Well, now, you need to understand that in those days, the translations were such that a virgin could reply to any woman that was alone. From the answer to that question, you can tell me 20 things about that guy. Well, it's the same way in my business. You show me a person who wants to have drag queens in the library, and I will tell you where he stands on the Strategic Defense Initiative, because it is a mindset. We need to hustle, and here's how it works. So, Moses, you want somebody that fears. And now, before we leave this topic, and we're about to do it, let me just give you a little aside. You don't want to marry a person who thinks they're God, by the way. You don't want to go into business with a person who thinks they're God. And he said you don't want to put a person in government who thinks they're God. Those that fear God, men of truth. Now, what does that mean? What is truth? Yeah, you wanted to know that, didn't you, Pilate? Well, I'll tell you what truth is. I can say this room is 75 feet wide. You can say it's 65, you can say it's 55, and we can all just be just pleased as punch. We can discuss it, we can go to the faculty lounge, we can write white papers, and we can have seminars, we can go on, and everybody's happy until someone comes and measures it. And when they measure it, that measurement is truth. Everything else is just opinion. But here's the significance of the truth. Truth reveals error. Therefore, error hates truth. So I said 3 times this room's 75 feet wide. Somebody comes in and measures it, 63 feet. Everyone in this room knows that what I said was wrong. Therefore, error hates truth. And the messenger is immaterial. It can be a 6'8" football player, or it can be a 10-year-old girl. The truth speaks for itself. It reveals error. However, it's more than that. Truth overcomes error. And so you're prosecuting a fellow for stealing a ATM machine. And his defense counsel gets up why he wouldn't do such a thing, why he loves his mother, why he was out having dinner in Portland, Oregon with his sister, and here's the receipts from the... You don't care what she says, because when she's finished, you're going to show a security camera as he drives his pickup up to the ATM, and you'll see him as he put chains around the ATM, and you'll see his face on the camera as he leans over, and the fingerprints as he picks it up, and the truth will overcome the error such that the only way she can succeed is to prevent the presentation of truth, because truth overcomes error. And I don't need to go into this a whole lot longer, but if I can pray in front of an inaugural, I can pray in the name of Eagle Feathers and Mother Earth, and nobody cares. But you pray in the name of Jesus Christ, all hell breaks loose, because they know that truth overcomes error. And so our founder, we hold these truths to be self-evident, which is a gracious Jeffersonian way of saying any idiot ought to understand this. You'd be blind, deaf, and dumb, bozo, and you ought to be able to say all men are created equal and are endowed by a 5-4 decision of the Supreme Court. No, are endowed by their Creator. Now, wait. Now, people say, well, they didn't know what that meant. Well, yes, they did. It's John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. And the Word became flesh, and it dwelt among us. Now, we understand that who that was. That was Jesus Christ. Or man is endowed by Christ, man is endowed by God, man is endowed by his Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life. No. This is between a woman and her doctor, and I don't want government involved in it. You're in the wrong country, honey, because it says right there in our birth certificate that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. It's best if I go forward, not backwards. Among these are life, liberty, the pursuit, and that to secure the purpose of the United States government. You want to know what's the difference between every other country on earth? The purpose of the United States government is to protect innocent life. Notice the sequence. See, life, then liberty. See, liberty is a precious little value if you're dead. You have to have life first, then liberty, then sewer systems and overpasses. But the first thing you do is life. And you have every right to ask a person, whether running for school board, running for sheriff, you say, well, what do I have to do as a library board? Well, if you're going to be involved in government in America, you should be dedicated to the preservation of life and liberty. And because, why? Because any politician that will take innocent life will not hesitate to take your liberty. And you want to know who comes in? And they'll tell you when you can meet and how many people can sit in the pew and how often. And they told in Sacramento, they put out an edict that Catholics could not pray the rosary because it was a chant, and you couldn't chant during COVID. Now, find that in the Constitution. Those people are sitting up there figuring out ways to find Christians that would finally begin to almost start to say no. I mean, the list goes on and on because we didn't understand the significance. So that final point is this. Fear God, men of truth, hating socialism. You say, whoa. You say, I've only got 3 things to say. Fear God is essential. That's the spiritual. Rule of law, that is government. Economic, those are the 3. Freedom is a 3-legged stool. Economic, political, and spiritual. You can, if you don't have any money, you don't have any freedom. That's what anybody's had a teenager understands that. You can be in jail and be a multimillionaire. If you don't have the political liberty, you're not free. You can be a multimillionaire in a free country, and if you're addicted and spiritually bound, you're not free. In order to be free, you have to have all three. You have to have a fear God, men of truth, hating socialism. And I am running out of time. So let's listen twice as fast as I'm talking. What is money? Money is a representation of a contribution I've made to someone else. Now, you go into there are only two ways that I can get money. You go into a shoe store, you say, I want to have those shoes. What does the shoe store say? What have you ever done for anyone and been entitled to those shoes? You say, well, I mowed Widow Johnson's yard. How do I know you mowed Widow Johnson's yard? Oh, I have this. What's that? It's a $20 bill. It is a representation of a contribution that I made to someone else. It's a way of keeping track. Well, you can mow the lawn in 20 minutes. These shoes take an hour. You come back when you've done enough. And so the purpose of money is to represent what we've done for others. And there are only two ways to get money. Only two. There's a car going down the street out here. One is free enterprise. That is where I lay awake nights figuring out ways how to do good things for people such that they come, slam on their brakes, pull in the parking lot. You're going to wash my car and do the carpeting, clean the windows, do off of the dashboard. I'd much rather have that than have this $10 bill. Oh, this pair of shoes and $60. A global position. I'll never get lost again. I'd much rather have that than have $200. Under free enterprise, the way that you get money is by doing good things for other people in which they voluntarily freely reach in their pocket and make an exchange, which at the end of the exchange, they are both better off. And if not, they don't make the exchange. They are both richer than they were before. They have created wealth. And by the way, that's the only way that wealth is created. And I'll just tell you, I grew up Pentecostal, and I know when you say something profound, you're supposed to say it 3 times. That is the only way that wealth is created. That is the only way that wealth is created. Now, I said there are 2 ways to get the other one, car going. The other is I just go take it. Now, under free enterprise, I'm better off. The person's better off. Let's hit it again. Farmer's got a pile of wheat. Baker's got 10 empty ovens. The baker says, if I had his wheat, I could get donuts and sell them in the morning. Farmer says, I don't need his wheat. If I had his money, I could get a new tractor, put a roof over the barn. The 2 of them make an exchange, which at the end of the exchange, they are both better off. They have created wealth. Now, since they both benefited, suppose a person comes along here and it just comes up to the street light, puts a gun in their corner and says, I want all the money in that purse. Have they created any wealth? No. Have they redistributed the wealth? Yes, from that person to you. But the degree to which the one person benefits is the degree to which the other is diminished. There's no wealth created. That's why socialism always creates poverty. It only works that way every time. And so when a person comes along, well, you understand. So we're rewarded in proportion to our contribution to others. The more we bless people, the more we're rewarded. That's why this country, let me just give a quick example. I was walking out the door one day, and my son said to me, he said, Dad, you have that app on your phone that tells you where gate you're going in and where you're going out. I said, Robert, what are you talking about? He said, you put this app, he shows you, he said, you put this in here, and you put in your flight numbers, and it'll show that when you're taxing, whether or not you go right across the hall, whether you got to go 15 minutes away. I said, well, how much is it? We look at it, it's 99 cents. Now, question, is it worth it to me to have that on my phone for the next 3 years for 99 cents? Yes. Question number 2. Did that person do that? Did they make that app so that I wouldn't get lost in the Atlanta airport? Nope. They neither know nor care. They hoped that 1 million people would download the app and they'd become a millionaire. And that the government wouldn't come along and steal it, as it does in most of the countries of the world, so that this little 4% does 90% of all the apps on the planet. Final point. Do I care whether or not that app was made by a 6'8" African-American male or a 4'11" Asian female? The answer is, I care not a whit. Because under free enterprise, you're rewarded because of what you do for others, not because of who you are. And those people, as you saw, they always want to talk about women's rights and Hispanic rights and all the rights of the group. And under free enterprise, you're not rewarded because of the group. You're rewarded because of what you do for others. And so, fear God, men of truth, hating socialism. And what's the principle? Free enterprise, The greater the contribution, the greater the wealth. Socialism only redistributes what someone else makes. Rounding third, heading for home. I'm now going to give you 90% of all the economics you'll ever need to know your entire life. Here it is. I'm an economics major. I can tell you, this is all you need to know. Let us say this represents 100% of the income of any city or any state or any nation. Let us say it represents a $100 bill. And you go to Walmart, and the most expensive thing in the store is $99. You have $100. That means you're completely free to choose anything in the store. Let us suppose someone comes along and takes 25% of it away from you. What happens? Two things. Number one, there are some things you can no longer choose. Fewer choices. Thomas Jefferson said freedom is having choices. The more choices I take away from you, the less freedom you have. I repeat, if you've had a teenager, you've had this debate. And the more choices I take away from you and I take money away from you, you have a lower standard of living. Now, that makes sense to everyone except the New York Times. That would be a profundity. Oh, you mean when the government takes the money, I'm worse? Yes, exactly. So suppose someone comes along and takes half of it away. What happens? Even fewer choices, even less freedom, even lower standard. Suppose someone comes along and takes 75, leaves you with 25. What happens? Fewer choices, less freedom, lower. Suppose someone comes along and takes it all. What do we call a person who works all day and keeps absolutely nothing? That person is called a slave. Now, there are two people that can come and take money away from you. One is called a criminal, has a gun, and can come and take money away from you. The other is called a politician, has a gun, and can come along and take money away from you. Here's the point. The impact is the same. You go to the pay window, you walk out across the parking lot, a fellow comes up, puts a gun in your ribs, says, I want 50% of everything you've got. You go home, sit home with your wife and children. Here's how much money we have for food, clothing, and shelter, the kind of vacation we can have, the kind of car we can drive. Or you make it all the way to your pickup, you open up the pickup, Uncle Sam's already been here, the paycheck's half gone. The impact is the same. So what's the principle? The principle is the greater the freedom, the greater the wealth, the greater the government, the greater the poverty. And it only works that way every time. That's all politics is. You show me where any city or any state. When I was in the state legislature, Ohio was number one in new job creation. We elected a governor, said we can put a stop to this. And so and when the last governor took office, we were 49th out of the 50 states. The last 4 years ago, we were 49th. And out of the 50 states, for the first time in history, looking at 50, for the first time, Ohio said, thank God for Michigan. But nevertheless, you can make any rich place poor. If you don't think so, drive to downtown LA. You can make any rich place poor or any poor place rich. Let's jump through the examples. In college, they told us America's rich because we're hardworking. We got lots of natural resources, temperate climate. Bull. North and South Korea, same heritage, same culture, same climate, same everything. At the end of the Korean War, South Korea was third from the bottom, the poorest nation on earth. South Korea got freedom. North Korea, over the last decade, 10% of the population of North Korea starved. Food, clothing, and shelter. The first thing they do is food. You can't do that. They eat in sticks and waves. The South Korea, 10th largest GDP on the planet. What's the difference? Freedom makes the difference. When that's Nagasaki at the end of World War II, wasn't nice. They attacked America for no reason. We said, don't do it anymore. And so what does America do? Listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. Never in the history of mankind has one nation shed blood and treasure for the freedom of another and never asked anything in return except the United States of America. There's never been a nation like this. And in the all recorded history, never has a nation become the premier nation on earth, but what it didn't seek it and knew what it had to do to get there and to stay there. Only the United States of America since World War II. And ladies and gentlemen, we need to understand what happens if we are not in that position. 70%, between 60 and 70% of all maritime traffic goes through the South China Sea. China is militarizing it. They did it under Obama. It stopped under Trump. It's starting again. Suppose they say to Japan, the fourth largest economy in the world that imports all their oil, unless you pay us 10% on the price of oil or else break relations with Israel, we're going to take the money. We have no idea what the world will be like when you don't have America as the God-fearing freedom nation of the world. And that's what is at risk in all of this. There's what Nagasaki looks like today after Americans were gave them their freedom and free enterprise. At the same time that Nagasaki looked like that, the richest spot in the history of the world was a place called Detroit, Michigan. It wasn't close, by the way. Over 18%, nearly a fifth richer than the second richest city in the world. They elected a racist at the end of the 1950s, and they took that until now. There are 48,000 single-family dwellings in the city of Detroit that are not uninhabited or uninhabitable, because you can make any rich place poor or any poor place rich. Detroit is now the poorest city north of the Rio Grande. It's essential that we know these things because God said you need to know God's way, you need to have a standard for truth, and you can't steal from other people. He thought it was important enough to say not to commit socialism. And so people say, well, but it wants to sound good. If you think that you want your tax dollars to help the poor, then keep saying that you want a Christian country and Christian values because you don't. Notice the little slick move right here. You, as spiritual leaders, know that the Scriptures creates three institutions: the family, the church, and government. And it's true. Over 400 times, as Bill Federer will probably tell us tomorrow, between Bill Federer and David Barton, two of the most outstanding people that understand the spiritual founding of our nation, and they'll point out that 2/3 of the time it says about helping the poor, he talks about you and me. A third of the time he talks about the church. Now, this idea that it's somehow godly to elect people to come and steal from one another, I don't need a book, I don't need a chapter. I'll take one verse where God ever called upon a politician to use the police power of the state to steal from one group and give to another, and he gets brownie points. If that works, sign me up. I'm for the program, but we can't find it as yet. And so we conclude with this. Why does socialism never, ever work? As Charlie Kirk would say, put your seatbelt on, we're going to go fast. Let us suppose you're going to buy something for yourself. You care about two things. You care about the price, because you're paying for it, and you care about the quality because you're going to consume it. And nobody can make that decision as well as you can. You might pay $4 for a cup of coffee at 7 in the morning for which you wouldn't pay 50 cents at 3 in the afternoon. When it's your money buying something for you, that's called a first-party purchase. Let us suppose that one of those things is not controlled by you. Let us suppose you're going to buy something for someone else. Do you care about the price? Yes, because you're paying for it. Do you care about the quality? A little more flexible on the quality. By the time it breaks, they'll be married for 3 years. They'll forget who gave it to them anyway. This will be fine. We've all bought things for people we never would have bought for ourselves. We've all received things as gifts. We care about the price? Yes, because we're paying. We're not as concerned about the quality. However, let's turn it the other way around. Let us suppose we're going to consume it, but we're not going to pay for it. Do we care about the quality? Absolutely. So the waitress comes along and says, would you like to have some orange juice? And you say, well, how much is it? And she says, well, it's $3.50 a glass. And he said, really, I'm fine. I don't need it. Oh, you got the pancakes. Well, it comes with the pancakes. Well, in that case, pour away. I'll take 3 glasses. You might walk off and leave half a glass. You wouldn't if you were paying for it. Do you care about the quality? Yes, because you're consuming it, but you don't care about the price because you're not paying for it. Final example. Let us suppose that where you work, everybody that comes in late has to put $5 in the kitty, and at the end of the month, they take the money and raffle it off. And so at the end of the month, the boss comes in and says, John, see how much money's in there and buy something with it. And so you count it out. There's $150. You go to lunch, you forget all about it. You come back, you got 5 more. Oh, my goodness, what am I going to do? And you look around the corner, and there in the store window is a 6-foot-tall stuffed frog. And you go check the price, and it says $149. Oh, this is great. And so you go buy the frog, you go shove it in the closet, and the boss at the end of the day invites everybody down, lectures to them about being late. Everybody draws a number to see who wins. Sally, the new secretary, what does she win? Open the door, 6-foot-tall frog. Everybody laughs and oh, that's so wonderful. You grab board it in the front seat of her car. She drives off with the frog in the front seat. What is that called? That is called a third-party purchase. A third-party purchase is purchasing something with money that's not yours, therefore you don't care about the price. If you had $200, you spent that. If $300, you would have spent that. It's not your money. Who cares? To buy something you're not going to personally consume, therefore you don't care about the quality. Now, they say in public speaking, when you're about to say something profound, that you're supposed to pause for emphasis. So I am now going to pause for emphasis. Because what I'm about to say is not Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, Christian, Democrat, labor. This is the facts, Jack. All government purchases are third-party purchases. Made with money that's not theirs to purchase things they will not personally consume. Therefore, will there be waste in the highway department? You betcha. Will there be waste in the defense? You can count on it. That's why we believe, as Abraham Lincoln said, the government should do only those things which a man cannot do better for himself. Why? Because every time we use our dollars to save and invest, to use to the maximum benefit of ourselves and our family, and run it through a third-party system called government, we are in the process of making the nation poorer. And you show me what percentage of the GDP of any city, any state, or any nation, and the principle applies, the greater the freedom, the greater the wealth, the greater the government, the greater the poverty. Now, these ideas only work based upon his principles. The Constitution was made for a moral and a religious people. And so therefore understand that when Satan is slick, you know that? He didn't come up to Eve and say, you know, that guy was really stupid. He didn't know what he was talking. No, he said, no, he's fine. This is to make one wise, be like God, knowing good and evil. It's good to eat. He makes it sound good. And those professors that entered our seminaries 30 years ago said, you need to watch out for those politicians. You need to watch out for people when you get involved in government. Your call is straight to keep your eyes on Jesus. That's the greatest calling of all. You don't want to get your eyes off anything else. And so now they've convinced people that it's noble to sit there and watch this lighthouse for the gospel. As Rob McCoy said, if you take all the money that goes for global evangelism from the 96% of the world, increase it 5.5 times, that's still not as much as the 4. This is the lighthouse for the gospel. And Scripture says if you take a city must bind a strong man, there's only one strong man in the world, the United States. You take America down, the rest of it's a piece of cake. And so therefore, if we convince the pastors to tell the people in the pews that they shouldn't get involved, then we can steal this thing and shut the whole thing down. And you have to understand how evil this is. It's as though that you're walking down the street and you run into the city councilman and he says to you, Pastor, by the way, that church has been there for 100 and some years. You got prime property. We really need it for a parking garage. We're going to vote on Tuesday to eminent domain, take your church and turn it into a parking garage. So you go to the people in your church, you go to the leadership, and you go to the Sunday school teachers and say, we need to show up on Tuesday night to explain what it is that we do is more important than a parking garage. And here's what we've done. And you run into the teacher for the 4th grade boys. Well, Pastor, God didn't call me to go to city council meetings. I wasn't called to be in politics. God laid these children on my heart, and that's my ministry in which I'm involved. And God called me to take these 10, and you want to grab them by the lapel and say, Bozo, you understand that this church goes down, your Sunday school class is going with it. How can you not? If this country goes down, your church is going with it. And if you sit by and... I'm sorry. And so in the final words of George Washington in his farewell address, in which it had been read in every school for 200 and some years, he left this truth, and it goes like this. Of all the habits and dispositions which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. If the pastors leave, if the pulpits leave, we're out of business. Let us with caution indulge the idea that morality can be maintained without religion. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. Without God, righteousness exalteth the nation. Sin is a reproach to any people. What is sin? Sin is anything that separates us from God. And sin, when it's conceived, this is how you can listen to a politician. You'll understand where they stand. Sin, when it is conceived, bringeth forth death. The wages of sin is death. There is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof the ways of death. But I am come that you might have life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He that hath the Son hath life. And this nation was married to life. And you and I hold it in our hands to be the light for the world. I've got 30 seconds left. I've spoken at every presidential prayer breakfast in Ukraine. We started it about 7 years ago. Last October was the last one. It's like every prayer breakfast in every presidential palace. And I've probably done it in 30 countries. Those people, they pray for the diplomatic corps, they pray for the parliamentarians, but they spend half of their time praying for the United States of America. Because if we abandon them, they cannot survive. And that has been entrusted to us. It's now in our hands, and we're going to stand before God. God didn't have some very happy things to say in the parable of the talents to the guy that didn't do anything. He was rather aggressive in his response. We don't ever want to face that. We want to say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. God bless.